Good morning, everybody. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me and see me or anything. Okay, good deal. Thank you. Well, it's raining. Doggone it. I was going to go running after this, but I don't know if I'm up to it in the rain. Well, chapter 4 is due tonight. I'm going to end class a little early to give you guys plenty of chances to ask questions. And the test will be next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, 1 week from today. And it'll be about 50 questions, roughly, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. 2 hours. 2 hours should be plenty. It'll start at 9:30. It will be in MindTap, multiple choice, open book, open notes. I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, tell you no, you can't. Actually, it's fine. Don't feel like, I mean, you can do whatever. Just not open each other. No communication with each other, please. What else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, but prepare for it because, you know, you haven't got all day. So, you know, prepare for it like you would an in-class exam, though I'm giving you a little longer. Maybe I'll bump it to 3 hours. I don't know. No, I can't do that. Some of you have classes right after this, and that's not fair. What I could do is give you 3 hours just any time on Tuesday. So from the time you start, you got to stay with it. Is that better?
Yeah.
Anybody care?
That would be awesome, Mr.
That'd
Ford.
be awesome. All right.
Do that.
Well, why don't we do it that way? I'll just have it for Tuesday whenever you want. But once you start, you gotta, you know, you gotta keep going. The timer begins then. Okay. Well, we'll talk more. I'll open it up for questions later, I guess. Let's get through. We're going to start chapters 23 and 24. We're going to kind of do those in together. They're kind of, let's think of it kind of like the first and second part of the same chapter almost. So we kind of lump those together. And the first one is chapter 23 as a national income. And here's where, well, I don't want to douse the fire, but this isn't the most exciting part of economics. Okay, it's as I say here in the little lecture, it's a necessary evil. We've got to know some definitions. We got to do a little number crunching to understand what GDP is, GNP, real GDP, real, you know, all that stuff. And so let's can you, by the way, can you see the screen where it says national income and the cost of living, second discussion, lectures? Is that visible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just make sure I've clicked all the buttons here. Okay, discussions. I've removed those from the grading. Nobody is doing them, and as I said before, it's not like they're my favorite thing either, so I can't really. And I never really do that in my face-to-face classes. I do them with my online classes, but by face-to-face, I don't that much. Certainly not for grading anyway. And this was a face-to-face class, right? It was converted at the last minute, so I guess I should stay with the spirit of a face-to-face. All right, well, let's jump on into chapter 23 and talk about GDP and GNP and all that stuff. I've got my little presentation, my little lecture queued up, ready to go. Let me Let me make sure I click on this share the computer sound and so here we go. GNP and GDP.
What we're going to do now is called the circular flow model.
Okay, well, that didn't last very long. Here we go.
You had a very brief introduction to that in chapter 1. But here we are. Let's go over it. Now we're going to actually use it. So down here, let's put product markets. Okay. Up here will be resource or factor markets. Often called, actually probably more often called factor markets. Over here are households. And over here, firms or businesses. Okay, this is going to be a very simple flow. I mean, we'll start out, we can make this as complicated as we want, but let's start out with it being real simple. Okay, here we go. Hang on. Households spend money in the product markets and that money goes to firms, and what do they get back? Goods and services. Okay, now let me pause for a minute to let that sink in, because that's pretty complicated. Now my guess is actually that you've engaged in a few of these transactions. Okay, so if you've ever gone to the store, you've done this. Okay, this is real hard. You go to the store, you spend your money, and you buy something. There you go. That's what that is. Okay, easy enough. See, I told you this was simple. Well, let's look at the resource or factor markets now. Households sell their labor services in the factor or resource markets, right? Another way of saying that, you go to work, okay, and what do you get in return? The firms who buy your labor services pay you, right? And you receive income for your work. So there you go again. You've probably engaged in that, where you went to work and you got a paycheck. There it is. Our economy, our simple economy. You spend your money, you buy stuff. Where do you get your money? Well, you go to work and they pay you. Okay. Now, we can make it more complicated. We can put government, say, in there and have siphon off taxes. And of course, government's going to be hiring people, and they're going to be buying goods and services. And some of this spending is going to be siphoned off here over into foreign countries, goods produced there. And they're going to be buying, the income they receive from us, they will be buying our stuff. So we can get that a little more complicated. But this is in essence how things work. Now, this is a key Here's what we're trying to get out of this, though. What is the value of the goods and services produced in the economy? This. We want to be able to measure the value of all the goods and services being produced. We want to see how big the economy is. In other words, how much is this? Well, it's just equal to the spending. However much we spend is equal, that's the value of the goods and services produced. Right? Right. Another thing I want you to notice, or to get out of this, is notice that the spending flows through as income. So how much income is there in the economy? The amount of this spending. All this spending ends up as income in somebody's pocket, whether it's wages and salaries or interest income or dividend income, corporate profits. Okay? All this. So what's the value of the income in the economy? Just the value of the spending. We can measure income by spending. We can measure the value of the goods and services produced in the economy by the spending. And that's what we're going to focus. There's a couple of ways to focus on this. We can itemize all the various types of income. Oh, and by the way, that has a name. The value of all these goods and services. Yeah, well I was getting to that. Gross domestic product, or gross national product. Started off as gross national product, actually. And what happened was during the Great Depression, we didn't know how bad things were. We just didn't know. And so Simon Kuznets, an economist, was hired to come up with some kind of what we call the national income accounts. And what he did is he came up with something called the gross national product. Or GNP. The gross national product is the value of all final goods and services produced by U.S. firms or citizens, okay? Over the course of a year, okay, or over the course of whatever period of time it is. Typically, it's a year. It comes out, the estimates of GNP come out, well, actually, it's GDP, but I'm getting ahead of myself here nowadays. But every quarter, we get an estimate of what it is. So why did they come up with this? Well, first of all, having some national income accounts and some accounting helps us to identify economic problems early on, you know, instead of waiting until it's too late. You know, we can catch things earlier. We know what's happening before they get so bad that we you know, they're so obvious. And we can evaluate economic policy to see which way the wind's blowing by some numbers. Well, that's from, I guess the 1930s through the early 1990s. GNP was the single biggest economic number there is. Okay, that's like the final score. That's the bottom line. Well, in around 1991 or 1992, the world economy became very interconnected. And of course, that was right about the time the internet was coming online, and that really globalized the economy in a very big way. But they decided that what was more relevant was gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is the value of all final goods and services. I'm going to just, all that, same as GNP. Value of all final goods and services produced, here's the difference, within our borders. Okay, here's the difference. What we really thought was relevant was not necessarily how much U.S. firms and citizens were producing, because much of that production was taking place around the world. What was really relevant, what we were most interested in, is what was being produced right here within our borders, irrespective of who was doing the producing. For example, there's the BMW plant in South Carolina, and that plant hires a lot of people in South Carolina. All good, right? So, but because BMW is a German firm, all that production in South Carolina of those BMWs would not count in GNP, because it's a German firm, not a U.S. firm. And I don't know if it's still the case, but Ford used to be the top auto producer in Great Britain. I'm sure they're still one of the top, if not still the top. All that production of autos, that's great. It's great for Ford shareholders. Great for Great Britain. Okay, so all that does show up in U.S. gross national product. So the change, the emphasis was switched from GNP to GDP. Okay. And that is now our prime emphasis as gross domestic product. We were interested mostly, GNP is still calculated, but our emphasis, that's our number, GDP. What is being produced within our borders, the value of all final goods and services produced within our borders.
Okay, well, as luck would have it, I have a poem to read to you. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm back on there, right? Yeah, don't say that economics, you can't get a little culture and refinement from economics. You're going to hear it right here. Now, honestly, I don't get poetry. I don't understand it. It just like, phew. Never had a poetry class. It just leaves me puzzled. But here is a poem that I do understand. Okay, and yes, I'm going to read it to you. This is dated December 3rd, 1991. That's just after they announced, the government announced the emphasis on GDP instead of GNP. And I happened to catch this on CBS this morning. And Charles Osgood wrote this poem. He said, oh, where is it? Ever since I was an economics student back at Fordham, the letters GNP I would associate with boredom, as if I had been programmed under some hypnosis deep. So if someone mentioned GNP, I would go right to sleep. Say only that the GNP is up or down a trifle, and suddenly there comes a yawn I cannot seem to stifle. The letters GNP had such a mesmerizing force that I wondered why I ever took that economics course. There I'd be, awake and active, alert as I could be, and if someone should happen to bring up the GNP, my scalp would itch, my teeth would ache, my eyes would start to spin, and I could no longer tell you who I was or where I had been. The GNP has haunted me, even to this day. When I'd see an economist, I'd run the other way. The economist might be a clever and engaging chap, but he might say GNP, and something in my brain would snap. So imagine my delight to learn now what we have in store. The gross national product won't be used much anymore. For the world has changed so much that what went into GNPs included things our companies were making overseas. It is gross domestic product they'll be using now, it said. Where they have been saying GNP, they'll say GDP instead. I will not miss the GNP. And with this new middle letter, the GDP, it seems to me, things ought to go much better. So, a poem in economics. How's that for getting your money's worth? Well, let's now bring this to life a little bit. And we'll go to our Economics USA movie. And I'll talk about GNP and GDP and the whole works here.
Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg Lerner.
In the 1930s, the American economy went bust. A frustrated Congress asked, was there no way to measure the depths of the Great Depression? As the United States was pulled into World War II, how did a system of accounting become the key to building the American arsenal?
Until the late 1980s, America's measurement for economic growth was called the Gross National Product, or GNP. Then it was changed to the Gross Domestic Product, or GDP. Why was it changed? And did it make any difference? Most of us tend to decide how well we're doing economically by what we can afford to buy. New clothes, new cars, or a new home. But can we calculate an entire nation's economic well-being by adding up all those individual measurements? And can we compare those national figures over a period of time to determine if our economy is making progress? U.S. economic growth. We used to call it the Gross National Product, or GNP. Now we call it the Gross Domestic Product, or GDP. But just what is GDP? With economic analysts Nariman Behravesh and Richard Gill, we'll explore that question on this 21st century edition of Economics USA. I'm David Shoemaker.
These computer tapes at the Bureau of Economic Analysis in Washington hold the record of America's economic growth in the past 50 years. They provide instant access to the accounting system known as GNP.
But when the United States faced its worst economic crisis, the Great Depression, no such measuring tool existed until this report went to the Senate. A copy of National Income, 1929 to 1932, is pretty hard to find today, but back in 1934, it was something of a bestseller. 4,500 copies were sold in just 8 months at 20 cents a copy. The report was put together by a team from the Department of Commerce in response to a congressional demand for more information. What was the Great Depression really costing the American economy as a whole?
Led in part by the rise of the auto industry, the economy grew rapidly in the 1920s, generating more jobs, more income, and more free time to spend enjoying it. As long as the factories were humming, the cash registers ringing, and the paydays arriving, there was little concern about how well the nation was doing economically. But when the bottom dropped out in 1929, Congress was at a loss to decide how bad things actually were. As the lawmakers rushed to pass New Deal programs to bring the country out of the Depression, Senator Robert La Follette wanted to know what was the state of the economy.
The greatest economic crisis in our history is the grave national emergency, which makes it imperative that we fight the Depression on all fronts. Congress must formulate a sound program to this end.
La Follette's Senate resolution directed the Commerce Department to make estimates of national income for the 3 previous years. Dr. Carol Carson has studied the development of the national income accounts during the Depression.
You could look up and down your home block and see that people were unemployed and that incomes were dropping, but they had no idea nationwide what was going on. And the numbers that they were after were aggregate statistics.
The man called in to direct the official government study was Simon Kuznets. He had been working on income estimates for the National Bureau of Economic Research. At the time of the Great Depression, the lack of information about the economy was, in Kuznets' words, a scandal. The data available were, as he put it, neither fish nor flesh nor even red herring. When he arrived at the Commerce Department, Kuznets found he would be working with economist Robert Nathan, one of his former students.
He put me to work measuring some things for which we didn't have very direct data. We never had a service census. We never had a retail census. We never had a construction census. And the result was that there were a lot of gaps. And that's what made it so tough. But conceptually, Simon gave it a degree of depth and measurement-wise, a degree of reality that never had prevailed before.
One of Kuznets' basic concepts was to limit measurements to the marketplace. Thus, the amount people were paying for goods and services could be used to measure the consumption component. And the money spent on new production facilities, plants, and equipment gave a total for the investment category. But there was a problem: how to avoid double counting. In the flow of payments through the economic system, where do you measure? Take the creation of an automobile. The mine operator gets income from the sale of iron ore. The mill owner gets income from the sale of finished steel. The manufacturer gets income from the sale of the finished car. To avoid the inaccuracies of counting the same money 3 times, Kuznets decided to use only final sales. In this case, the amount paid for the automobile at the dealers. If there is a need to know how much value was added along the way, say at the manufacturers, that can be found by deducting the cost of the finished steel from the amount paid for the car. But not all the nation's work is performed on assembly lines or in department stores. As much as 1/4 of the work in the economy is at home, and no one gets income for it. Kuznets decided to exclude this work, primarily the cooking, cleaning, and childcare provided by housewives, because it was too hard to measure and because of the kind of work it represented.
He was shrewd. He didn't say just housewives. He said housewives and other family members' services. He considered that an integral part of the family rather than part of market production. And his emphasis was on market production. So he felt that on that basis it could be excluded. Also, he recognized the difficulty of estimating housewife services.
Illegal activities were also excluded. Money earned from bootleg whiskey and beer, smuggling drugs, gambling, and other criminal acts. This was also hard to estimate, but Kuznets had another reason.
Illegal activities were excluded largely because he had an orientation that wanted to measure the goods in society. And he felt that this was not a good but a bad. Or you could put it in terms of he was interested in measuring services, and the illegal activities were considered a disservice. And the mere fact that there were laws against certain activities were what he used as the criterion for deciding what was a good or a bad or a service or a disservice.
And goods and services that are exchanged or bartered are also not included because they cannot be measured. So money had to be paid for the product or service for it to be included. Kuznets spent a year working with government departments and private agencies in Washington and across the nation. On January 4th, 1934, the completed report was sent to the Senate, and the nation had its most comprehensive economic measure, one that brought home the bad news. National income had fallen more than $40 billion since 1929. Unemployment had increased sevenfold. 12 million people were thrown out of work in 3 years. In the future, this concept would be renamed the gross national product. And when it was adjusted for inflation, real GNP would give an accurate measure of growth in the volume of the economy's production. 37 years later, Simon Kuznets was honored for his work on national income and economic growth with the Nobel Prize. He was cited for giving quantitative precision to economic entities.
Today, the gross national product is the ultimate benchmark that measures the expansion and contraction of our multi-trillion-dollar national economy. It covers everything we make and sell in the marketplace. It's used by bankers, brokers, and government officials to decide interest rates, investments, and tax rates. But how can anything so large and so complex be made simple enough to be useful? We put that question to economic analyst Richard Gill.
GNP is not really a simple concept, yet it is extremely important for the whole area of macroeconomics. A careful consideration of this concept, for example, brings out the basic equivalence of production and income, the cornerstone of much macroeconomic analysis. In a very simple economy, we can describe economic transactions by means of what economists call the circular flow. We have businesses here producing goods and services, GNP, and selling them to consumers like ourselves. We call them households. This is the upper loop. Down below, we have these same households selling their services, their labor, for example, to businesses who use these services to create the goods and commodities in the upper loop. The businesses pay the households for these labor and other services, thus creating a flow of money income to the households. The households, of course, use this income to buy the goods that businesses have produced. Now, these two flows are basically equal. What, after all, is the source of the real income of the economy? Answer: the goods that the economy produces. So the studies of Kuznets and his colleagues did much to illuminate the macroeconomic structure of the economy. But also, they did more. Imagine, for example, trying to plan a major war effort without knowing the size of the real GNP that your economy is producing. As the nation prepared for World War II, this was no academic question.
The militarists of Berlin and Tokyo started this war, but the massed, angered forces of common humanity will finish it.
January 6, 1942. President Franklin Roosevelt is giving the country its marching orders. The success of those orders as a strategy to win World War II would depend on the American economy.
For months, the issue of how to prepare for war without getting involved in the actual fighting swung back and forth along Pennsylvania Avenue, from Congress to the White House. In the middle were economists for the Commerce Department and other agencies. They were trying to answer the critical question: how much could the economy produce and how fast?
As the German armies moved through Western Europe in 1940, pushing Allied forces into the Sea at Dunkirk, FDR could take only tentative steps in the face of pressures to keep America out of the war. In 1940, Congress agreed to only token increases in defense production. Roosevelt had to wait until after that year's presidential election to make his major move. On December 29th, in a fireside chat to the nation, he called for a Lend-Lease program to aid the Allies and $1 billion for arms production.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself.
As the war in Europe led to more Allied losses, plans for American aid increased. Special envoys were dispatched to London and Moscow to find out what war materials were needed. At home, the first mobilization committees were set up, bringing together business and labor. Robert Nathan, the chief economic planner for the Arsenal of Democracy, recalls that the first problem was convincing depressed industries to expand.
The steel industry, with great impact, came around and says, you're silly. We were down to 15–20% of our capacity utilization for some years at the depth of the Depression. And it was a heck of a fight. But I can tell you this, that I don't think we would have ever won that battle if we hadn't had the GNP weapons to demonstrate what an overall fully employed economy accomplishes.
When the first plants began shifting toward munitions and as the first Liberty ships were being designed, there was another capacity that had to be measured and planned for: civilian needs. Why was it important to know how much could be diverted to the war without jeopardizing the basic supply of food, clothing, housing, and transportation?
So if you didn't put it civilians, people wouldn't be alive, and who would produce the products? And you had to keep the schools going, and as much as you cut back, there was an awful lot had to go to civilians. So we translated that.
As the economists were preparing estimates, Roosevelt and Churchill met in the North Atlantic. The meeting in August 1941 is best known for the Atlantic Charter of Rights for Free People. It was also the culmination of months of bargaining over what war materials the U.S. would supply the Allies. Shortly after the meeting at sea, Roosevelt asked the Army, Navy, and Air Force to estimate the costs of an all-out war. Their total for the next 2 years, $150 billion, almost double the gross national product in 1939. Nathan's next task was to take the military's production needs and determine what was feasible. He started by breaking out the key sectors from the national income and production accounts.
One was steel, because we knew steel would be a limiting factor for tanks, ships, the big guns and the like. So how much steel was involved in all these numbers? Then we translated the airplanes mainly into aluminum, because you couldn't build airplanes without aluminum. Then we translated ammunition into copper. So we had the key elements. And it seemed to us very soon that we were going to build factories to process a heck of a lot more steel than we had. So you'd have fabricating plants that weren't being used or partly used, but more serious, you wouldn't have any end products. You know, you'd end up with wheels over here and generators over there, or parts of this, and you'd
build airplanes but no propellers.
That's right, and no underpinnings and things of that nature.
In the late fall of 1941, Nathan and his team sent their numbers to the White House as the debate continued over what production goals were realistic. Roosevelt was using them to reconcile the conflicting demands from the American military and from the Allies when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States was at war. Now, the ability to convert the American economy using the GNP information would be critical for our own survival as well as for our allies.
Our war program for the coming fiscal year will cost $56 billion. Or, in other words, more than half of the estimated annual national income. We shall produce 60,000 planes. We shall produce 45,000 tanks. We shall produce 55,000 anti-aircraft guns. We must convert every available plant and tool to war production.
When Franklin Delano Roosevelt led the country into World War II, he depended heavily on the GNP framework to predict the kind of arsenal our democracy could become. In fact, the economy exploded during those 4 years. 17 million new jobs were created. The index of industrial production doubled, and the GNP grew $75 billion. Economic analyst Richard Gill points out that estimates of the GNP were helpful in a number of ways during the war.
Without knowing the size of our real GNP, it would have been virtually impossible to judge how much war production was physically possible. Also, there was the question of how many goods would be left over for civilian consumption, and what taxes the government would have to levy to keep the economy from overheating. Look at our circular flow again. Production would normally flow from businesses to households, who would pay for these goods with their money incomes generated by that production. Now the government steps in. At one point, we were using half our GNP for war production. And suddenly we face a problem. Consumers still have these big incomes, but they have only this much smaller trickle of consumers' goods coming to them. Knowing what these numbers are, one can at least make rough estimates of how much purchasing power the government has to drain away from the civilian economy so that we won't face a terribly inflationary situation. So GNP figures were very useful during the war, as they have in fact been in all of the decades since, which is not to say that they give a complete picture of the progress of our economy.
Black Monday, October 1987. In a single day, markets worldwide crashed. A long-lasting crisis in the savings and loan industry puts the financial well-being of millions of Americans in jeopardy. The Gulf War reinforces recession by causing oil prices to spike. Grim economic news welcomed Americans into the decades of the 1990s.
At this turbulent moment, our primary economic measure of well-being was changed from the gross national product, GNP, to the gross domestic product, GDP. Why was this change made, and how good a measure of our economic well-being is GDP?
In 1991, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, who produced the numbers, they changed their primary focus from GNP to GDP. A couple of reasons. One, GDP is better designed to give information on the state of the business cycle within the United States, because it is focused only on activity within the United States. Secondly, most other countries were already focusing on GDP. So for international comparability, it was easier for the US to go along with what everyone else was using, which was GDP.
What is the chief difference between GNP and GDP?
GDP looks at production within a country. GNP looks at goods and services produced by US residents, wherever those goods and services might be produced.
So, GNP and GDP are numbers that represent the final value of goods and services we produce. But why do economists criticize these measurements for being an imperfect gauge of the country's welfare?
The failure of GNP to take into account environmental values. The fact that, for example, if we produce a lot of goods and services, if we use up machinery, that's deducted depreciation from GNP, but or from net national product. But if we dirty the atmosphere, if we pollute the air, if we make more people sick, if we cause more houses to have to be painted, that deterioration is not taken into account. Moreover, if it makes more people sick and they have to go to more hospitals and go to more doctors, that increases GNP.
GDP also fails to record certain services that contribute to our economy, like household labor, barter, cash-only transactions, illegal or not, which make up our underground economy, and losses from environmental events. Take, for example, natural disasters. What impact do they have on GDP?
If you have an environmental event, like a hurricane, causes a lot of damage, the value of the economy's assets is reduced, but GDP is measuring actual production levels. And the fact that if you lost assets don't immediately reduce production levels. So the environmental hit from a hurricane like Katrina, that's not included.
Not very much, but it's all we got.
Now, then in subsequent months, because capital has been destroyed, the level of production is subsequently reduced, that will be reflected, that will be counted in reduced output. But countering that, if there is output that is subsequently produced in order to repair damage that was caused by the hurricane, all of that repair activity, that will be included in GDP, even though you're just making good the damage that was caused by the hurricane.
Does it make any difference that there is this problem in relating some factors of environmental events to GDP?
Well, GDP is doing what it's supposed to. It's supposed to measure activity. It is not the best measure of welfare. And I think that's the issue here, that when environmental events occur, they affect welfare. And if you're thinking about the damage to the environment, perhaps even from regular activity, if we're creating GDP, but at the same time damaging the environment by doing so, that's not going to get recorded in the GDP statistics, but it will affect welfare. So the issue here is that GDP is not a perfect measure of welfare and should not be used as such.
So, if we're looking for a way to measure our well-being, our satisfaction with our lives, then neither GNP nor GDP would be the ideal tool. On the other hand, as economists are prone to say, if we're only interested in our economy's recorded transactions, then GNP and GDP are both equal to the task. So why did we go to the trouble of making the change? We asked economist Nariman Behravesh for his opinion.
Gross national product was designed as a measure of economic activity. It has been revised over the years to provide better estimates of the production of goods and services in the economy. For example, the switch from gross national product, GNP, to gross domestic product, GDP, gives a better idea of what is produced within the United States rather than what is produced by Americans, whether in the U.S. or elsewhere. GDP is a far from perfect gauge of economic activity. For example, it does not measure the economic contribution of stay-at-home parents or output in the underground economy. It only measures activities for which there is a measurable market price. Similarly, it does not take into account economic bads such as pollution. No, GDP is not a perfect measure of economic well-being, nor can it measure things like happiness. That said, higher levels of GDP per person are closely correlated with improved living standards, including health, education, leisure, etc., which in turn have a big positive influence on how people feel about their lives. Economists will continue to search for better ways to measure economic output. In the meantime, despite all its flaws, GDP is a pretty good gauge of what is going on in the economy.
The development of the gross domestic product, or GDP, began more than 70 years ago as economists tried to explain the boom and bust swings of the business cycle. We've seen its development as a planning tool in times of crisis. Today, when economists and government officials try to manage the economy to create jobs or raise revenue, it's changes in the GDP that tell them how well their decisions are working. For this 21st century edition of Economics USA, I'm David Shoemaker.
Okay. Whoops. Here we go. Okay. Well, as you can see, GDP is not a perfect number of economic activity or economic growth, but we generally think that growing GDP is overall a good thing. Okay, there are certainly some things that aren't so great, but overall we like it. We prefer a growing GDP than certainly a shrinking one or a stagnant one. Also, as you saw, economic statistics were virtually non-existent, you know, at one point. Well, I shouldn't say non-existent, but very few economic statistics. Today, contrast that with today, we're drowning in numbers. I mean, we got so many numbers available, we have to kind of sift through and be careful about which ones are more meaningful and which ones aren't so much. Well, okay, so you know what GDP is. You got some little bit of history and know what it's trying to do, what it's trying to measure. It's trying to measure output, what the overall economy is doing. Now we're going to do some number crunching. We're going to calculate GDP in a very, very simple three-good economy. So here we go. There's a little bit of arithmetic involved here. Well, that's not it. Is that it? This is it. Here we go.
Now that you know what GNP and GDP are, well, we're going to focus on GDP here, but we're going to do some calculating, some number crunching. Okay, so here we go. Now, just so you know, I'm going to have columns of numbers that are going to stretch all the way across here before we're done. So, if you're taking notes, you might want to turn your paper to the side there, have the long way, you know, that way. Anyway, here we go. We've got, let's say year one. Well, year. We're going to have 2 years involved, year one and year two. And we're going to have three goods. One will be bread. Here we'll put the price of bread and the quantity of bread. And the other, well, two more goods to go. Bicycles will be our other good. Here's the price of bikes and the quantity of bikes produced. And our other good, our only other good in our economy is dental services. So we eat bread, we ride our bikes, and we go to the dentist. That is it. Okay, easy enough. Well, in year one, 2 units of bread were produced. And bread, the price of bread was $10. 20 bikes were produced at a price of $50. And 5 fillings, okay, at a price of $100 each. Okay, there's our economy in year one. So what is the value of all final goods and services produced in year one? What is that called, by the way? The value of all final goods and services produced? GDP, gross domestic product. I should add produced within our borders, because that's what GDP is. GNP, gross national product, is produced by U.S. firms. Okay, well, easy enough. We just add these up. Let's see. 2 times 10 is the value of the bread. 2 times 10 is 20, right? So 20. Well, I'm going to run out of room. Well, I'll write it down. Okay, 20 plus bikes times the price of bikes. That's the value of the bikes produced. Okay, 20 times 50. Well, that's 1,000. So $1,000 worth of bikes produced. And 5 dental services, 5 fillings, times $100 each. $500 worth of dental services. So, the value of all final goods and services in our economy in year one is 20 plus 1,000 plus 500. 1,550, 1,550. Did I say 1,550? It's 1,520. What am I talking about? 1,520, 1,520. 20 plus 1,000 plus 500, yes, 1,520. And that we call nominal GDP. Nominal GDP. Ah, something new. Nominal GDP is, output valued, well, let me back up here. Be a little more precise. Is current output valued at current prices? When I say current, I'm talking about the year we're looking at. Here we're looking at year one. So when I say current, I mean year one. So in this case, it's year one output valued at year one prices. That's what we just did. Year one output valued at year one price. Year one output valued at year one price. Year one output valued at year one price. There we go. Nominal GDP is 1,520. Now let's do it for year two. Well, in year two, we had 3 units of bread produced, and the price is 12. 18 bikes at a price of 48, and 7 fillings at a price of 110. So what has happened to our little economy? Well, we're going to do what we just did. 12 times 2 plus 48 times 3 plus 110 times 18. This is the value of the bread. This is the value of the bikes. This is the value of the dentists. And then we add them up. So it's this times this, plus this times this, plus this times this, just what we did before. Whoops, this times this, I mean. And we get, this time, 1630. So, what happened to nominal GDP? It went up from 1520 to 1630. That's good, right? It's always good when GDP goes up. Well, wait a minute. There are 2 reasons why nominal GDP can increase. It can rise because prices rise. It can rise because quantity rises. If output stays exactly the same and prices go up, what's going to happen to nominal GDP? It's going to go up. Only because prices went up. Well, we don't like that. That's called inflation when prices rise. So nominal GDP can actually rise merely from inflation. I mean, output could actually go down, and nominal GDP can go up if prices rise by more than quantity falls. So what does this number, and then of course, if prices stay the same and output goes up, well, that's good. That's what we like. We like output go up. We don't want prices to rise. So the thing is, since nominal GDP can change for either reason, because prices change or our quantity changes, when we look at nominal GDP from year to year, we have no idea we have no idea why nominal GDP went from 1520 to 1630. In other words, tracking nominal GDP from year to year tells us nothing. Okay? It's basically worthless. So, we still use the number in the calculation I'm going to show you later, but by itself, it doesn't really tell us much. So, and year to year, it tells us nothing because we don't know why GDP changed from year to year. We want to know why. So, we're going to calculate something called real GDP. Real GDP is current output valued at base year prices. Okay? What we're going to do with real GDP is we're going to hold prices constant at the base year. So every year we calculate GDP, real GDP, what we're doing is we're going to calculate output. We're going to value that output at the same price. So prices will be held fixed in its base year. So any difference in real GDP from year to year to year will be entirely due to changes in output because we froze prices at the base year. So which year's the base year? Well, the base year is any year we decide the base year is. Okay? We just decide. Year 2 could be the base year. Year 1 could be the base year. Again, it's just whatever we decide it's going to be. So, let's say that the base year is year 1. Okay. Okay, now that we've chosen a base year, we can calculate real GDP. So, let's go through this again, and we'll put real GDP right here. So we're going to value this bread in year 1 at the base year price. Well, year 1 is the base year. So 2 times 10 is 20. We're going to value the bikes at the base year price, okay, which is year 1, so 20 times 50. Dennis at the base year price of 100. And guess what? Here's something to file away. In the base year, real GDP and nominal GDP are the same. They're equal in the base year. So just you know, if you were to see a problem, let's say with a list of numbers of GDP, and it doesn't tell you which year's the base year, and it asks you which year's the base year, well, you look for the year where these two are equal, and that, of course, would have to be the base year. Now, it's possible that by forces of chance it could be equal in another year. It's so unlikely. Okay, it's not that it's impossible. It's a non-zero probability, but I guess it could happen. Okay, so year 2. So we've got real GDP for year 1. Now let's calculate real GDP for year 2. So we're going to take the bread, the quantity of bread, and value that bread at the base year price. So that would be 3 times 10. 10 is the base year price. So quantity in the current year valued at the price in the base year. So 3 times 10 is 30. And then we take the quantity of bikes in the year 2 and value it at the base year price of bikes. So that would be 18 times 50, which happens to be 900. And then we take dental services, 7 dental services, valued at the base year price, 7 times 100, 700. Add that up, and we get 1630. $1630, and I made an error in my adding. I looked at my notes is what I did, and I looked in the wrong place. That is 1670. Sorry. Okay. 1630. Now the number tells, now we know something. We actually know something. Real GDP increased from 1520 in year 1 to 1630 in year 2. And by the way, just so we don't get confused, at what point of the year, at what point in year 1 do we know that real GDP was 1520? At the very end of the year, right? We can't know what GDP was during the year until the very, very end of the year. So this is at the end of year 1. This is at the end of year 2. So when did GDP grow from 1520 to 1630? It was during year 2. So we started out year 2. This is the end of year 1. So we started year 2 and grew to 1630 during the second year. So why did real GDP grow? Why did it go from 1520 to 1630? Well, the only thing that is allowed to change in the calculation of real GDP is quantity, it's output. We held prices fixed at the base year, so any difference in real GDP from year to year is entirely due to changes in output. With nominal GDP, it could be changes in output and changes in prices. That's why it doesn't really tell us anything. But having a frozen prices constant at base year prices, we know we did have some economic growth here. Real GDP increased, which means output of goods and services increased.
Okay, there we have it. Let me get you back here. Okay. All right, you guys still with me?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, I'm just checking. I see a bunch of, I see names and no faces and no mics. So I'm just double checking. I'm assuming that if something goes wrong and you can't hear me or see what's going on, you're going to tell me. Okay, you've done that so far. So, okay. Where are we? I thought I was going to say something. Well, it must not have been very important. I guess that's all we're going to cover today. Now let's talk about chapter 4. It's due tonight. Any questions? We got oh, I don't know, 15 minutes left in class.
Mr. Ford.
Shoot.
Tell me about how I can view my grades.
Well,
is there any way to do that?
You mean in MindTap?
Or yeah, my MindTap grade, just my economics grade. I just want to see how I'm doing in it. You feel me?
Well, if I,
I'd rather not be worried about my grade.
You know,
I
why
think
don't
I
we?
know how to do it.
Yeah, I know how. Maybe it'd be better if you explain it, because if I show you, I can't go in there and show you because everybody's going to see everybody's scores, and I can't do that. So go ahead and explain if you would, whoever's speaking.
So when you're in your Blackboard, you know how it'll say like my Blackboard and then the library and student resources. Above student resources, it says your name, and you click on it and something pops down, and you can click on the it's like a piece of paper with a check mark, and you click on that and it should show you.
All right, I'm trying that right now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me know if it worked.
Now that'll just show now the mind. Thank you. Yeah, the Mind Tap. That'll show you scores, but it won't show you a grade. Now, I've talked about this before, but that total Mind Tap score doesn't really mean much because it includes stuff that's not going to be graded. Sometimes, I don't know, it does on my end at least, and I think it does on your end too. But after the test, I'm going to post your scores. I'm going to post them in a spreadsheet, and just your graded scores. Okay, Mind Tap's going to, if you did some practice problems, it's going to show scores in there too. And those scores don't matter. It just they're just practice. So don't get concerned, or if you didn't do well in a practice set, and it shows up in Mind Tap, I'm not going to use those scores. Okay, practice is practice. They don't count. And
so,
remember,
Mr. Ford.
Yeah.
I'm on this Blackboard, and I'm looking at the check mark document, and it's got my grade on here. Is this my actual grade for the class?
No. Where are you looking? In Blackboard?
Here, let me show you. I can turn my video on and show you real quick. Can you see?
No, not really. But I haven't posted anything in Blackboard grade-wise. So wherever you're getting that.
It's not true?
Well, I can't see it. First of all,
here, hold on.
anything in Blackboard, anything you see so far, and are you clicking on where it says grades right here? Is that it? See where my cursor is?
Yeah, I think so. It says my grades, current grade total in economics.
Oh, no, not there. Oh, really? Well, I don't see that. I don't see where that's on here.
No, Mr. Ford, you don't get to it through that.
Okay, so you can get to it in another way?
Yeah.
How? I didn't know there was another way except for what I listed.
It shows like all of our class and our grades for those classes.
Really?
Yeah, but not through there. I don't really know how to describe the screen.
So you get it for all your classes. You see like a score for all your classes?
Yeah, it's like a list of our classes, and then if teachers have put in grades, it comes up.
And I have scores that are coming up in my class?
Yeah, I think it just puts something in when we complete the stuff on Mind Tap.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. I've been doing that. I've been using Blackboard since we started using Blackboard. I don't know, 10 years ago. I didn't see. That's what's frustrating for me. I don't see what's on your end a lot of times, anyway. I thought when I went into the student mode that I could see things on your end, but I guess I don't see everything.
See, I'm looking at the assignments that are on here though, Mr. Ford. There's like homework chapter 2 and chapter 1 though, so I don't think it's updated.
In Blackboard. Are you in Blackboard or Mind Tap?
No, I'm in Blackboard.
Okay.
But I'm just saying there's no scores for like chapter 1 and chapter 2 though, so it's...
Those are in Mind Tap.
All right.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. What I'm going to do, the way I do it, because I'm going to be posting them here. And I download, because here's the thing, your scores that you get from MindTap or anything are not properly weighted. See, anything that you've got, that you do as you read the chapter, you know, the quick quizzes, those all combined only count for 10% of your grade. But in MindTap, it doesn't know that. It doesn't know they only count for 10% of your grade. MindTap doesn't know that the practice problems it may list there don't count for any. Well, it should know, but I think it calculates them in the total score it shows. The homework accounts for a lot bigger share, and the tests count for a larger share. So any scores you see are not properly weighted, even though they might be accurate as far as your score and graded problems. I didn't know they flowed through into Blackboard. I didn't know that. And maybe I inadvertently set it up that way. Anyway, I
just don't want it to end up that you show us our grades after the test and mine is just terrible. You know what I mean?
Well, you can see your scores for each assignment. Let's say you got 8 out of 10. You know, that's 8 out of 10, 80%. You know that's good.
Yeah, most of my scores on MindTap are 100, but I saw that on Blackboard the other day. I saw the lower grade.
Okay. For that, I do apologize for the anxiety.
No, it drove me. It was just like, am I doing well in this or not? You know, I was worried about it.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm sorry you're worried. Now, feel free not to wait till class. You know, we only meet a couple times a week. Shoot me a message here, and you know, feel free to ask questions there too. I'm going to tell you to disregard whatever you see in Blackboard. Disregard. I don't even know what's there. The MindTap, only the graded problems count. So those scores, if you're doing well there, you say you got 100. If you got hundreds on the quick quizzes, you know, that's 10% of your grade. If you got, you know, if you're doing well on the homework questions, the homeworks are the ones in MindTap listed as homework. They are, I don't know, 40% or so of your grade. They're a pretty large chunk. That's kind of the bottom line there after you do the practice. So you can tell how well you're doing in the MindTap graded stuff just by your scores, you know, but again, I'll get a spreadsheet on there. And the reason I don't say too much early on, because there's not enough data. You know, like with your first assignment, you know, I guess we could calculate a grade, but it doesn't really mean much because you've only done a few assignments. So it can be misleading for good or bad. Yeah, shoot.
Let's say I get this spreadsheet, right? And my grade is god awful, like I'm failing miserably. What can I do about that?
Well, I guess we'll cross that bridge if it happens, but it sounds like you're doing pretty well. But if you do need help, I've talked about, well, tutoring. We've got a great tutor, and then you can ask me, where are my messages, or we can set up a Zoom meeting, or we, you know, you can always ask me to work problems, like I did the trade problem and posted. You can always ask me for help, guys. Don't think you can't. I know we're meeting online in this format that's a little frustrating, but you know, I'm here. You ask me or ask a question. Feel free to ask questions. But it doesn't sound like I don't think you're going to be shocked by your grade. If you understand the stuff, and if your scores in MindTap, if you're doing well in there, I don't think you're in for any big shock.
Great.
The MindTap score is indicative of your understanding and how well you're doing. Only the graded ones will count towards your grade, though. So, but usually that's good news, because students they don't worry about the practice problems. I've had students who, you know, do horrible on the practice problems, then they see their scores for practice problems showing up, and you know, they're terrified. They're wondering what happened. don't worry about the scores on the practice problems. And I'll have to investigate this Blackboard grade stuff. I didn't even know that that was there. Okay, sorry about that. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about
Sure.
the test. So Tuesday, are we going to have like a normal class, or is the first hour and a half of the 3 hours that you're giving us, are we going to do during like this time?
Well, what I intended initially until class today was to just have the test during class. It's online, but during class. But then I thought, well, maybe I'll give you a little more time. But then I realized that's not fair for those that have class right after. So then I kind of evolved into, I'll just have it be that day. And whenever you start, the timer starts. So you can take it any time of day, and we won't have class that day. The test, you're certainly welcome to take the test during class, because I know y'all have time then, and you might as well take it right then, rather than putting it off, or whatever. But we won't have class that day. We won't cover any new material. Just be the exam.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking that. I did mention that before. What else we got? Shoot, lay it on me. Anything else? If there isn't, feel free to send me a message right here. Ask me. I check that throughout the day, and I'll get. Again, I apologize for the shock you may feel.
Mr. Ford, I got one other question.
Sure, go.
Just the concept clips don't count. I just want to make sure I'm getting this correct.
Yeah, they don't count anymore. I was going to have them count, and they weren't working. They finally asked the publisher. They work in the learning path, what they call the learning path. They work in the body of the chapter. They don't work, and it was in the body of the chapter I wanted you to do them. And
now, will some of the older ones count towards my grade, or is it all of them are all?
Well, I'm just going to give you all the points on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Like for the first 3 chapters, I'm just going to, I guess I'm going to have to give you all the points so don't worry about that. So you got
awesome. Thank you.
Got a lot of free points coming, guys. Whenever I screw up, you guys never pay when it's my mistake. And it's the publisher's mistake, which means it's my mistake. So I use the materials. So I won't do that to you. So you're either the same off or better off every time I mess up. So anyway, we got 1 more minute. Anything else? I guess that'll do it. I will come back Thursday and continue on with chapter 23, and probably we'll wrap that up, I guess, and start on 24. The exam again doesn't include any of this new stuff, any of the stuff we covered today. So I'll see you Thursday for more national income. So have yourselves a good day. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Good day.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thanks. See you Thursday.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Have a good day.
Hey, you too. Thank you. Whoops. Why? I keep trying to end this thing and it won't end. Let's try it.